Welcome to the Limitless Podcast, where we help you break free from financial restraints and build the life you deserve. If you're ready to escape the 9-to-5, create financial freedom, and take control of your future, you're in the right place. Each week, we dive into real strategies, expert insights, and inspiring stories from those who have achieved financial freedom, so you can too. Welcome to today's show.
Okay, folks, welcome to another episode of the Limitless Podcast. Today, excited to have Marcelo Valdez on our call. And he's got some exciting projects in the San Diego area that he's working on, and also comes from quite a corporate background himself. And Marcelo, excited to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited to be here as well. What's really cool is you and I have been kind of sharing information back and forth on LinkedIn, but we also met personally in Portland. So it's kind of, now it's fun to do the full tech circle and now being on your podcast.
That's right. Yeah. No, awesome, Marcelo. Yeah. I know we've kind of pushed this recording a few times, mostly because you've been busy. I've been busy. You know, obviously development is a crazy world right now in a good way, but just a lot going on. So excited to dive in with you, Marcelo. I guess to kick off, tell us what you do today, what your fund focuses on, and kind of what you're doing down in San Diego.
Yeah. Well, so the fund is called the Next Wave Fund. It's actually Next Wave Fund 1, I believe is the full legal name. But we've been in business for a couple of years, but I've been doing the real estate game for a while now. And what we've kind of evolved to is there's a program in San Diego that allows build what I call backyard apartments, essentially taking the California's ADU laws, the accessory dwelling units, which a lot of people around the country kind of think maybe like a granny flat, a backyard apartment or something. But actually here in San Diego, well, actually to the whole state, you can build up to 1,200 square feet potential. So that's a very big granny flat, right?
Yep.
So what we're allowed to do here is if you have an affordable unit, which is actually deed restricted for affordable, 80% of the median income, which is published by the federal government, they put out the guidelines, then you're allowed to get a bonus unit. So you're allowed to first get what you get by right, and then you can kind of add on to it. So we have projects now, or I was actually just at several this morning. I did my rounds. One where we're turning a duplex into a 10 unit. Another one where we're turning a single family home in a single family zone into a 7 unit. Let's see. We have another one. We're turning a single family home into a 4-plex.
Wow.
So it just kind of depends, but it's great. And we've been busy with other projects as well that are in various stages of the pipeline. So as you say, keeping busy.
Yeah, very cool. And we've been seeing some of those, I guess, zoning upgrades, if you will, up here in the Seattle neck of the woods, Marcelo, and condoization, as it's being called, of DADUs and ADUs and granny flats in your backyard and stuff. And a lot we can talk about there. So I'd love to, dive in a little bit later. But tell us first, how did you discover this opportunity? How did you find out about this and decide to pursue this out of all the other real estate kind of ventures out there?
Yeah. To delve a little bit further back in the history, I first came to San Diego. I was in the military. I was in the Marine Corps. I was stationed at Camp Pendleton. I was actually, this is going to kind of show my age a little bit, but I was in the first Gulf War. So when I came back, I came down to San Diego and was still stationed, got out and went to graduate school. I did a dual degree program, both at USD and at Monterey Institute of Technology in Mexico in international business. And so that eventually led into a job at Qualcomm, which at that time wasn't that well known, but nowadays is a pretty well known company.
Yep.
And I actually did 2 expat assignments. I did one in Brazil, and then I later did one in the UK. And I was doing business development. So I was doing a great deal of travel. And you get married, kind of want to settle down. My daughter was born. Kind of one thing led to another, and I decided I had earned enough millions of miles.
Yeah.
Literally millions of miles, and started doing in real estate investing on the side, of course, after the big crash, the great financial crisis and all of that.
Yep.
And over time, I have an engineering degree, so I got my contractor's license, did a little bit of building kind of on the side. And then about 10 years ago, took the full leap out of the corporate world and started kind of doing a few different things. But then, and in fact, I had tell a bit of a funny story, and stop me if I'm talking too much, but I had rebuilt a house on an alley, and I built a garage unit in the back. And at the time, the regs at the city said, you have to actually deed record a document that says you will not put in a stove and you will never rent the unit out.
Right. Yep. Same,
And I
same deal
had
up
to
here in
provide,
Seattle. Yep.
pardon?
Same deal up here in Seattle. If you do a garage, you got to sign the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And oh, my dog's barking loud. Hopefully you don't really hear him. Somebody went up to the front door. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I did all of that. And then I said, okay, this is no fun because of the way the city makes it so difficult. Then the ADU laws came out with the state of California some 5 years or so ago. So I started to dabble then. And then the city came out with the bonus regulations. And that's when we really dove in about 3 years ago. And now, we're certainly not the only people that are doing it. Now it's, it's a little mini cottage industry here. And I think it's great because, again, these are affordable units for its workforce, rather housing.
Yep.
And I think it's really having an effect in the local market.
That's great, Marcelo. How do you see, improving, housing density, zoning regulations? How do you see this helping the overall housing crisis? And what are some potential downsides as well, or maybe some challenges that we have to work through?
Right. Yeah. So obviously it's deed restricted, not all of it, but you get a mix, which is great. It means you're putting affordable housing inside of areas where people can hopefully be a lot closer to work, where they're not off having to be in some far off corner of the city and have to make a large commute. So that's great. The one challenge I think is that the city made a very wide and wide open to interpretation set of rules. And so some people really went pretty hog wild. And you can build in single family zones. So like I said, I have one project in a single family zone. We're adding 6 units. Actually, there's 2. We have 2. But, we try to keep it fairly, how should I say, within a good mix. So it doesn't kind of overtake the neighborhood. But
Right.
there were some projects like on a cul-de-sac where people were building 40 units with no parking.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously some neighbors were pretty upset.
Yeah.
And so that has caused the city to take a step back and relook at this whole thing within the single family zones. So in
Yep.
June, there will be a hearing about that. And it seems like from what I've read, it's all pretty logical and shouldn't affect us too much because actually most of the work we do is in multifamily zones. But one of the good things that did come out of this hearing, which lasted literally all day long, was at the end of the hearing, the president of the city council said, and this is a new thing that's allowed now by the state of California, is, hey, let's talk about being able to sell these off individually, which I find very exciting. On the one hand, it's super exciting as myself as an investor and, having a fund and representing other investors who invest alongside of us. There's great opportunity to earn really great, solid double-digit returns. But also there's what's called the missing middle in housing.
Yep.
And in San Diego, the median cost of a house is $1 million.
Wow.
So if we can come up with something less than $1 million,
Right.
that's pretty affordable. So there are some challenges, but there are also some exciting opportunities that I see, hopefully not too far coming down the track for
Yeah.
everybody, for everybody.
Yeah.
'Cause we've underbuilt for years and years. So it will take us many years just to simply catch up.
Yep. Same problem we're having here in Seattle. And obviously San Diego is a beautiful place. A lot of people want to be there, taxes or not, still one of the most beautiful places in California.
Well,
Sorry,
real quick, but
Yeah,
one thing about
go ahead.
taxes, and of course I hear people talk a lot about that, but there's the other thing, which is we have Prop 13, right? So you actually have an issue where a lot of people are, and I'm going to call it trapped in their homes because you have 2 things. Number one, a lot of people actually own their homes outright. There are people who bought homes 30, 40 years ago. And at that time, 40 years ago, the average cost of a home in San Diego was fairly even with the average cost of a home throughout the entire United States. And then they brought in Prop 13, which limited significantly the property tax burden. So you'll see people who have a home that's worth $1 million and they're paying, $1,500, $2,000 a year in property taxes.
Wow.
So
Wow.
those same benefits, obviously, when you buy, you're going to have a full step up, but property
Yep.
tax still applies. And so you're still capped. So it's not like Texas where, and I've done some work in Texas where people get literally priced right out of their homes because of the property tax increases. It's one thing people don't talk about as much here in California. We don't have that.
Yeah. That's crazy. So, I mean, I think a lot of, listeners probably are thinking, hey, there's all this, housing density updates coming down. There's what's called TOD, oriented development up here in Seattle. I'm not sure if it's also called TOD. Okay. It is down in San Diego as well.
It is.
TOD.
Yes. All
Okay.
of this, I didn't go into all this three-dimensional chess when you're trying to figure out what properties to buy. It's all oriented within a certain distance of transit. Absolutely.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So TOD or these infill lots and stuff like that. I'm sure we've got some listeners who are probably homeowners and they're thinking, hey, I've got a R8 or a R6 lot, which is basically 5,400 square foot, or a 10,000 square foot lot. What's stopping me from going ahead and putting a fourplex on my property? Right. What would you say? Is it something that somebody could, with a decent sized backyard could go ahead and plop a couple more units on their backyard, or what
Oh yeah,
would that look like?
absolutely. Typically what a person will do if they own, and our designations are a little bit different than yours, but same concept. If somebody owns those kind of lots around San Diego, typically they'll build one ADU. As I said, you could build up to 1,200 square feet, but some do build more. I'm actually around where I live in the beach area, and all of my neighbors have an ADU. And I plan to actually build one that I get by right, and then an affordable with a bonus. So I'll put 3. So I'll turn, just like you said, I'm going to be turning my house into a fourplex. And, obviously once that's all done, any question of house payments or whatever gets taken care of. So it's really exciting for people. And a lot of people are taking advantage for sure.
Amazing. So adding, I'm not sure what that right critical mass is, but say adding 2 or 3 units could completely offset your primary house payment.
Oh, totally. Absolutely.
Wow. And how much are these units renting for?
Yeah. So, okay, this is San Diego. So obviously it depends on location.
Yep.
But to give you an idea, so I'm an old military guy. So there's something called BAH, base allowance for housing.
Yep.
So for enlisted folks and that means basically it's a person who, not an officer, but somebody who's kind of done their 18, 19, 20, 21, anywhere from what's called E1 to E4. So that's up to corporal. That's basically somebody that's got a year to 4 years in the military. Their base allowance for housing is $2,700 a month.
Wow. And that's a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom?
It doesn't matter. I mean, you just say, here you go, here's a check, tax-free. Hey, here's your $2,700 a month to go figure out where you want to live. But just to give you kind of an idea, now the actual table for affordable housing, like what we're building towards for a 1-bedroom, it's just shy of $2,600 a month is considered affordable for a 1-bedroom.
For a 1-bedroom.
Just to have an idea. So
crazy.
And most of our units, we don't plan to rent them for that high, but, certainly like, for example, in the beach area, 1-bedroom would actually go for more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So someone could, living in San Diego could completely add or convert their single family property into a fourplex or up to a fourplex. Why did you decide to become a developer and go and start doing more than just your own property, but to scale beyond that?
Yeah, well, I've always loved real estate. There are so many benefits to it in the tax code, right? As we all know, 1031 exchanges and self-directed IRAs and self-directed 401ks. We have multiple investors that have taken their self-directed either IRA or 401k and invest with us. So that's great because we have a pretty quick turnaround. Like the first project in our fund will be done probably in about 14 months. So they'll be able to reinvest that money, back into our next project. And they don't, if it's in a 401k or an IRA, they don't have to worry about the tax implications. But anyway, to say that, so I saw that. And real estate has been in my blood forever. And there's a if you look around, like I said, we've underbuilt literally 4 decades. And one of the things I tell people is, like, if you look at a map and you go around all of the kind of the central neighborhoods in San Diego, the older ones, like mine, there's an alley. And if you look on the back of these back lots, these lots are all empty. And the reason is because, as again, I said at the beginning, the rules were so onerous. If you wanted to put in a 1-bedroom, you had to provide 2 parking spots because they round up. They say, oh, a 1-bedroom. Well, it depends on what part of town you are, but they may say, oh, it's you need to provide 1.25 parking spots per bedroom, and you have to round up. So now you say, okay, well, I want 2 bedrooms. All of a sudden,
it's 3.
there's literally not enough room to build anything at all. So as you look all across the city, there's all of these areas with empty backyards. So, I had read somewhere that both in LA and San Diego, something like 70% of, let me get if I want to say this right, 70% of residential zoning is single family zoning. So you look around and it's, oh, this is just a total greenfield, and there's such an opportunity here. So that's why I decided to do it, and I don't have to get on a plane unless I'm going on vacation.
Yeah. No, I love it, man. I love it. Yeah. And it's, I think I've heard, 2 of the biggest reasons that we have the housing crisis that we do. I mean, one, it's a supply crisis, right? It's, supply demand. If we increase supply, and I think I in fact read a study last week that areas of the nation where supply is increasing, rents are actually coming down because, again, supply demand. If there's more supply, prices do come down. And then secondly, the other challenge or the problem that's caused the housing crisis is lack of zoning, right? Or zoning not meeting the housing demand, right? So hopefully between those 2 things, that'll alleviate a lot of the crisis that we have. But it's going to take some time to get there. And it sounds like, you and your fund are going to be quite busy for some time here.
Yeah. I mean, as I've told people, to me, it's just kind of like a blue ocean. I had lunch with somebody else was doing something very similar to me, and he doesn't have a fund, but he was thinking about it. And he's like, oh, I don't want you to consider me competition. And I said, look, this is a blue ocean. We can just both go to the ocean with a bucket and, just shovel as much as we can.
Yeah.
Neither of us are interfering with the other. So there's so much demand, especially as I said, I really hope they do adopt the ability to sell off individual units
and condoize them.
And exactly. Because it's great to provide rental housing, but I would also really love to be able to provide new housing for people to purchase their own home. It's something that's so difficult to do here. It's nearly impossible. And because we have either the ocean to the south or to the west, we have Mexico to the south, we have mountains and canyons to the east, and we have Camp Pendleton, which is got me here in the first place, Marine Corps, to the north. So we're like an island. And so we have to figure out creative ways to provide new housing for people. And there just isn't, they're not making more land. So that would be very exciting to me because again, rental is great and we still need more of it. But I think even more than that, we need to be able to provide somebody's first home. That would excite me. I would get emotional, really, about being able to do that. So we're going to a session with the mayor tomorrow. And he's Mayor Todd Gloria. He's fantastic because he's been very pro housing. And actually, for the first time since the Great Recession, San Diego actually has had relatively flat rents. Been about flat. Whereas, like you said, a lot of places, it's gone down. Some places the rents have dropped by double digits because overbuilding. It's almost impossible to overbuild here. So, even during the Great Recession, during the worst of the Great Recession, there was one of like 12-month period where I think rents dropped here about, it was like 3%.
Wow.
So the demand has just been tremendous. Anyway, like I said, I would love to be able to take that next step. Hoping we can do that and that he pushes hard for that.
Yeah. And I'm right there with you, Marcelo. I think home ownership is, I think we all know this, but is one of, if not the major way that we build wealth in this country. Right. And, for the foreseeable future, at least until crypto takes over, right? I think real estate's still going to be that way that we all build wealth. I mean, I was telling right before we started recording this show that, back in 2015, it was that first townhome in Costa Mesa that started us on this journey toward real estate and wealth creation and everything. And fast forward 10 years later, and we're building 40 homes here, here in the Seattle area, all from that, not all of it, but a lot of it from that first townhome 10 years ago. Right. So it is. Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And I hope, that San Diego can help condoize these units, and that, we can really tackle both, not just the supply problem, but also the wealth creation, problem, and lack of, frankly, affordability, I think, for housing at large. That's great. I guess, Marcelo, it's interesting that I think both you and I are part of the same fund administration, platform and network here. And I remember, I think it was back in Portland, I was remarking how there's 200 plus funds in this platform. And it seems like 198 of them are doing multifamily, and two of them, maybe I think it was just you and me, who's doing ground up development.
Development, yeah. Yeah, not a lot of developers out there. I was like,
no, there's not.
We are an elite crew.
Either elite or stupid or something. I don't know.
Or insane.
or fill in the blank. But why do you think that is? I mean, I think you and I, both just we're just talking about the opportunity, the blue ocean that it is, frankly. Why don't more folks focus on development, or even just funds focus on development?
That's a good question. I think because, I'll give you an example. You talked about starting off with, with the townhome or whatever. I, for a long time, had stuck with doing things with single family, or, that 1 to 4 unit thing. And it was just frankly just a self-limiting belief, right? I think for a lot of people, all of us have self-limiting beliefs. And, the idea that commercial or whatever requires so much more sophistication, or it's so much more difficult or whatever. I think the same applies with development. And it is, there are aspects, as you know, that are more risky. There are aspects that, you have to know more or whatever. But the thing is, you can always grab people and form a group, a team of experienced folks that can kind of help you out. Because once you do get the construction going, actually just ground up construction is easier. It's easier. Myself as a contractor, I don't really like doing rehab work, because there's just constantly all kinds of stuff that you find that are behind the walls or in the structure.
Behind the wall.
No,
exactly.
And whatever. Whereas when you're doing ground up, there's no guesswork.
It's a clean slate.
Plans laid out, and you just follow them and you go. So I think a lot of it probably is that. It's probably for a lot of people, they think, oh, I can do a value add on a multifamily. I'll buy a building that's run down, fix it up, and we'll get the rents up and whatever over a certain amount of time. But that just didn't excite me. I like being able to go where the demand is. And the demand is for new product. So I think, to answer your question, I think my guess is that's probably a lot of it. It probably, to a lot of people, feels more comfortable.
Yeah. And I think I would frankly agree, Marcel. I think a lot of it is mindset, and people think, we're like I said, we're building 40 homes up here in Seattle, and we got plans for hundreds of more. But
and you guys are
tons
doing some beautiful work. You guys have I've been following on LinkedIn, some beautiful projects.
No, thanks, man. I appreciate it. But each of them is kind of a labor of love, right? I mean, it's, there's permitting challenges. There's, city calls up and says, hey, I want to do it. This additional inspection or whatever, sets you back 3 weeks, supply, you got tariffs now to worry about, blah, blah, blah. So there are a lot of things to sort of keep in mind.
Yes.
But all in all, I think and I'd love to hear kind of maybe a bit more about your unit costs or your numbers, Marcelo. But up here in Seattle, for example, we're building, our total development cost, including land, everything, is no more than 65-70% of the finished value. So we've got a 30%, 35% profit margin. But I see that also as downside protection too. That means the market would have to drop over 30% for our investors to lose any money. Right. So, and I think that's something that I think only new construction really affords or allows that kind of margin.
Yeah.
So I see that as a huge benefit too. It's not just, you're starting from a clean slate, but you also have some great downside protection in case things do go south. Are your numbers similar? What are your unit kind of cost numbers?
Yeah. And in fact, the way we structure it is when we go into construction, it's kind of like, you can sort of think of roughly a third of the total cost we put in as equity, roughly. Yep. So that we come out the back end with the ability to, if we had to refinance at 50%, because of course, here in this market, it's more expensive, things don't cash flow as easily. So we want to make sure we come out at a 50% equity position. And
so 50% LTV is where you end up from a development.
We end up at 50% LTV. Yeah.
Wow.
Or no, L2. Yes. LTV. Correct. Excuse me.
Yep. Loan to value. Yep.
Loan to value of the final value. And, and the other thing is, of course, we're building a for rent product. So worst case scenario is we rent it out, finance it, refinance it, or rent it out. So
Yeah.
yeah, in fact, I've thought about with our pitch deck is actually maybe reordering it a little bit and put, especially with the current environment, people I think are feeling a little bit more hesitant, and to put just like risk in big red letters at the very beginning, because that's what
Yeah.
will keep us up, right? We
Yeah.
want to be able to have people feel comfortable as at the end of the day that we are coming in, we're going to take on less leverage, so that at the end of the day, when we come out the other side, worst case scenario, refinance, cash flow, hang on to it, and weather the storm.
Yeah. No, very cool. So great market, tons of potential, well, hopefully one day end buyers, but at least today tenants. So great market to be in. You've got a strong, client base, very low LTV, 50% is great, margin, and obviously upside's great, but from a downside perspective, you're definitely protected. I guess it seems like a no-brainer to me, but what are the typical sort of investors that invest in your fund? What's their profile? Like what kind of goals do they have, and why are they investing in your fund?
Yeah. So, it runs the gamut. We currently have mostly retail investors. We are now looking to take on other larger investors. What some people may or may not be familiar with of your listeners or viewers, the fund to fund model, or just larger portfolio type equity investors. But for now, we've had everything from friends and family, your doctors, your lawyers. We're an accredited fund. So we can take on what are called accredited investors.
Yep.
And most of them really like what we're doing because it is relatively short term. One of the things you mentioned about sort of a lot of the multifamily model is that you're kind of locked in for 5 years, 7 years, sometimes longer. Whereas ours, the goal is to be out in 18 months roughly. And so,
Wow.
so that's relatively quick, right? Because kind of the way the model works is you have an existing home. We don't tear it down. We keep it. And then we keep it, we rehab it if it's single home or duplex or apartment, build the additional units, and then we're done. So that way we can turn over fairly quickly. So for a lot of the folks, they like the fact that there is that relatively quick turnover and they're not locked in for a really long period of time.
Amazing. And what kind of returns, Marcelo, in those 18 months?
Yeah. So we target 20%. So we don't put anything out there to investors if our pro forma doesn't show a greater than 20% return.
Yeah.
Obviously no guarantee, and that's annualized. Obviously no guarantee, but so far we're seeing that. So again, to me, I almost want to, at this point, de-emphasize the return and really much more emphasize the whole element of downside risk, because that to me is much more important than talking about our fantastic double-digit returns. I feel like over the next several years, kind of the way the market is, we'll be able to outperform the market. So it's now really emphasizing to folks, hey, even though this is development, like I say, we're not tearing down the existing structures. I'm involved in one project where we're buying at a nice discount a 6-unit building within walking distance of downtown, and we're going to add 6 more. So, and I call those super value add. So we're, it's already a deal that already has cash flow. We're not tearing down again the units. So I really want to start to emphasize the element of our downside protection more than, hey, look how great these returns are.
No, that's good. And what's the ultimate exit plan or strategy for these projects? So obviously you'll rent them. They're built to rent effectively, but is there some end game in mind, say years 5, year 7, year 10, where you exit these, or what's the exit?
Well, as I said, for the most part, these are for sale product. So, we'll acquire, design, permit, build, and then rent them out and sell them.
To stabilize them.
But we do have, like recently, there was one individual doctor who was really excited, but then he said, oh, when he found out how quick the turnover was, he said, I actually want some tax benefit. We're like,
for example, depreciation or what kind of,
right? And he's like, if you're only selling 18 months, I don't really get much to the depreciation benefit.
Right.
And especially now, if the new administration re-ups the whole bonus depreciation, all of that, then we do want to provide some longer term holds for people that do want to depreciate. So currently the model is just what I said, but in the future, yeah, absolutely. We'd love to make an offering. Maybe and I don't know exactly what it'll be. one out of every three or something will be, hey, guess what? We're going to hold this one for 5 years so that people that do want the depreciation can have. So
Yeah.
I think we'll start to provide a mix. And obviously, if the city does allow us to sell off individual units, then we know what the exit is there. So I think the answer is it's a mix for what people really want,
Yep.
value
works.
add with depreciation, or you just want to get a nice big bang in like 18 months and have your money to either reinvest or walk away with, retire in Puerto Rico or whatever.
Yeah, totally. No, I think build to rent is especially sexy right now, as I'm sure you've seen it from an investor perspective. A lot of institutional hedge funds are now picking up a lot of BTR projects, either at stabilization or even a couple years down the road. So great market to be in. And I think what I like about your project, Marcelo, is that they're not, typically when you're seeing BTR or build to rent stuff, they're 100, 200, 300 plus units, right? They're massive projects. You're talking 50 million, 75 million, $100 million exit finished values, right?
Mm.
And only the Blackstones of the world can really afford those kind of assets, right? So,
Yeah.
but what you're talking about is like, I don't know what
I'll tell you
what
that
the finished
our
value might look
range
like
is
from, yeah.
our range is from approximately 3 million to 7.
Okay. 3 to
7 at the
7.
very
Nice.
highest of the high end. A
Yep.
development, we have 3 blocks to the beach. That's probably the highest we'll go.
Okay.
Precisely for that reason, because like there was one of these projects, wasn't ours, but sold for, I believe it was 3.2 million, and it sold in like 28 days and for all cash. And from what we understand, it was a professional athlete from LA.
Very
But,
cool.
it's people who are moving up from 1031 exchanges, right? So, it might sound crazy, but in San Diego, you can sell a fourplex for, whatever, $2 million. And it's like,
Yeah.
what's my step up going to be? Well, we provide that kind of product that's great because it's done, it's finished. Don't have to worry about maintenance or anything. We've got a brand new product. Everything's been done to code. Boom, they can roll right in for, a reasonable price, $3-4 million, and do, roll their 1031 into the next project.
Amazing. You mentioned some magic words there, 1031. It's tax season for a lot of people. And
Yeah.
Explain a bit more how that works. I think a lot of folks, Marcelo, understand 1031 is typically more of an existing play, right? So you're trading one existing real estate property for another existing real estate property. I think in my travels and conversations so far, I found, not a lot of investors understand or realize that you can 1031 into new construction as well. Explain how that works for your projects.
Right. And to be clear, we have not yet done anything like that. However, for example, I've been taught, because we do some deals that are direct, where I talk directly to the seller. This gentleman has a property, it's fairly run down. He wants to be able to move up and do more projects. And I said, hey, why don't we could buy your property, do what we do, right, in partnership with you. So we'll do a joint venture.
Or something. Yep.
Tenants in common. And then
Yep.
you could then take that property and take your gain, and you can go roll that into the next project. And we can either partner again on that, or we can help you, and you can do that tax free. So that's something he's really considering very seriously, because he had already wanted to do a 1031 exchange, but even just the repairs that he needs to do is kind of beyond his really both financial and kind of technical capabilities. So absolutely, people want to do 1031 exchange, we can work with them.
Very
That's
cool.
what the beauty of real estate is.
Yeah.
So flexible. There's so many ways to work out a deal.
Yeah. So let's rewind, Marcelo, back to when you were at Qualcomm. I think you were there in the early 2000s. Keep me honest there. What was your, I guess you had this maybe appetite for real estate. When did that interest start in real estate? When did those, kind of take us back in your mind or in your psyche as far as, I'm tired of the golden handcuffs. Obviously, you've mentioned being tired of corporate travel, being on a plane, working maybe as those, consulting hours and those 4 days in a hotel or whatever. But yeah, so take us back there. And like, was there a point of frustration? Was it a series of events? What kind of, caused that transition?
Yeah, I think, as I said, it was just really, it had gotten to be that time that it just, it was something that had built up over time, and it was a mutual thing, all good things come to an end. It was amazing. It was fantastic. But I had a friend of mine from that time had a story where he was doing all the traveling. He said one night he woke up in the middle of the night and he looked up the ceiling. He was like, oh my God, where am I? And then he realized, like, oh, I'm at home.
Wow. Wow. But he'd been home or slept in his own bed
Yeah.
so
And I was like,
frequently
oh,
that I
thank
was
God.
surprised to be there.
I'm at
That's
home.
crazy. That's crazy. That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
So, and it
Yeah.
also coincided, it was just after, it was a couple of years after the big crash had happened.
Yeah.
So there were opportunities and it just, it was that time. So,
Yeah.
and again, I loved the experience, but it was the time. And, now is a great time. Now is a great time for tech, people who are in tech. There's a lot of turbulence right now. Some stocks have really popped and really people can, their RSUs or whatever their options are. I would encourage, now's a good time to look to diversify right now. And I think, this is a really fantastic opportunity for not only for people in tech, that's where I came from. And that's kind of who I target. And I say, hey, take some of the chips off the table and go lay them into something where you can start to get some cash flow or start to, reduce that downside risk because you never know as we
Yeah.
get into more turbulent times.
And how did you kind of pave that pathway for yourself? And, was it did you save up X amount of money? Did you think, okay, I need a 6-12 month runway to make this new business get off the ground?
Money.
Yeah.
I had money and I was doing flips. I was doing some construction for other people. So I had activity going on. So there were
Gotcha.
already things that were happening. And as I said, if I look back, the only thing I would have done differently, I would have done two things differently. One, I would have learned about raising capital much, much, much sooner. That was another limitation I had in my head. And the other thing I would have done is to got into much bigger, more commercial type projects sooner as well. But I already had things going, like I said, house flipping and stuff. If I could talk to my younger self, I'd have said, hey, after you get 2 or 3 of those flips under your belt, move on up. Don't
Yeah.
keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
And
I had something going. So
I love it.
I was busy. I didn't sit around for very long. That's for sure.
So basically that side hustle became your main hustle effectively. Yeah.
Yep.
How do you avoid, or maybe you don't, or maybe you're kind of working towards it, but how do you, it's been said that the entrepreneurs are the ones who work 80 hours to avoid working 40, right? It sounds like maybe you're having some 60, 80-hour days, or weeks rather.
Yeah.
But do you have systems in place? Are you working on kind of bringing that number down?
I am. I have brought on more and more people to help me out for sure. And, from the military, I think I've learned pretty well how to delegate and, kind of provide that leadership to other people. So that is something I need to do more of. I think now I've kind of been up a pretty steep learning curve. So now it's time to take those learnings and put that much more to standardizing things so that this machine becomes a machine that doesn't require me to operate it all the time. And definitely. We're getting there.
Awesome. I think another thing I like about your story, Marcelo, is that you've got a partner in this business at Next Wave, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Tell us about partnerships, how you have found those to be helpful. I assume that it's positive. How
It has been for me.
And how that helps. And I think you've described to me in the past that you guys have different, strengths, different skill sets. But yeah, explain to us, your experience with partnerships, any lessons learned, and any just your insights there.
Yes. So my partner, Andrew Erickson, we met, it's been almost a year now. And he had a property that he purchased and he was super into ADUs and the whole backyard apartment thing, just like myself. And we met at a real estate investing event. And he was saying how, geez, I need to look for a builder because I have no idea how to build. I got no idea what I'm doing in that part.
Right.
But he's a super, super smart guy, an engineer by training like myself. But I don't I'm much more freewheeling. I was in business development when I was at Qualcomm and he was like an actual engineer. So he's kind of like the yin to my yang. I had, we were talking and I said, oh man, the one thing I cannot stand is spreadsheets. I was like, and his eyes got real big and he got super excited. And he said, I love spreadsheets. And I thought,
awesome.
oh, I think you got
I think I found my guy. Exactly. Yeah.
So we very rarely step on each other's toes, which is the key thing. You don't want, but you wouldn't want to have two people who are really good at building or two people that are really good at financially modeling and into spreadsheets working together because they'd kill each other. So we really do not have very many overlapping competencies, which is really good. So that I think that's the biggest thing, is telling anybody if you want to get into a partnership, which I never wanted to do. But if you're going to do it, find somebody who literally, you almost think of the yin and yang symbol, where you do not have any overlap. You don't want to meet somebody and go, wow, we both like the same teams and the same sports, and it's so great we jive because,
Yeah.
you want,
Yep.
you want somebody who's got totally different competencies, and we do. And I think it's working well. And I hope it continues to work well.
Awesome. Awesome. And I actually tell people, Marcelo, and I'd be curious if you agree with this, but, for a lot of people, they may have one, one piece of it, but not the other. So they might have capital, but don't have time, or they've got time, but don't have capital, right? Or they can build, but aren't good at spreadsheets, right? Do you see partnerships as a viable way for people even to get started? Or do you recommend that is partnerships for beginners or people who are more advanced or farther down the road?
So now, the older and wiser that I've gotten, I would say partnerships is almost the only way to do it. And anything and everything you do needs to at least have a concept, a philosophy of partnership. So whether it's actually something where, like Andrew and I, our signatures are both on all the documentation for the fund, right? But it doesn't have to be that way for somebody to be a partner. And so, again, if I were talking to my younger self, I would have said, go out and partner with as many people as you can, even if it's only in one project or in one element of something, because you're not going to know all the answers. And so you can bring in all kinds of people to help strengthen you. And it really does take a team. And so now everything I do is leading with partnership, everything.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Awesome, man. So a couple, I guess, fire round questions as we wrap up here, Marcelo. Favorite book? It could be real estate. It doesn't have to be real estate, but yeah, favorite book.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to do the typical real estate one is Kiyosaki, right? Everybody gives that. I'm actually reading, and in fact, let me grab it.
Yeah.
This guy. So I like
Brian Tracy. Yep.
Brian Tracy,
Mhm.
and I like Jim Rohn. And every once in a while I grab one of their books because those are the OG guys. So actually, Tony Robbins started off working for Jim Rohn, and a lot of people, he's passed away now. A lot of people haven't heard of him, but he's got some good audio stuff. And I would say just about anything from either Brian Tracy or Jim Rohn on the business side for folks. It's just kind of like I'll put in an audio book or actually read a book, kind of a reminder. It's all very basic. It's super simple, but it's just like good, like, oh yeah, I need to reset. I need to reset
Yeah.
myself here. And I would recommend anything by those two guys. I think they're both fantastic.
Very cool. Very cool. What would you tell me if I came to you and said, hey, Marcelo, I'm just getting started in real estate. Like maybe I've been in tech, maybe I've been doing something else and I want to get started. What would you tell me?
I would say, again, about the whole thing with partnership, go find some people to partner with. And even at the most basic level, start off with little baby steps, and everything builds and everything builds. So if you have some money, go provide some money to somebody and say, hey, listen, I want to invest, but I also want to kind of learn. Maybe give me one little task, one little thing that I can handle, that I can take on. If I have a full-time job, give me that. I'll do it. Anything where you can kind of partner with other folks, you can call them mentors, but people who just know more than you do. In the Marine Corps, we call them a jungle guide. So go find your jungle guide.
Jungle guide, yeah.
And get started and do it today.
Yeah.
Don't hold off. Find something to do and go do it today, and go find a jungle guide.
Love it. And what's the dream? What's your dream?
My wife was asking me this the other day. I think for me, the dream is really simple: to do what I want to do every day, whatever that may be. And I love traveling. I just want to be able to, when it hits me, to be able to go to my wife and say, hey, you know what? In a couple of weeks here, let's go take a long weekend or week off and just go travel. And I don't have to ask anybody. And we have the financial freedom and time freedom to be able to say, let's just go do that. Simple. Or I'm a surfer. I like to go surfing. And so I'm kind of already doing part of that dream. Whereas to say, hey, I know that tomorrow it's going to be looking good. So this 2 hour
There you
time
go.
clock, it's out. So I'm
Yeah.
already halfway there.
There you go, man. Love it. Yep. Surfing and building in San Diego. I love it.
Yep.
Love it. That's awesome, man. And we're looking at some of your deals right now, Marcelo. So very excited about the work you're doing. How can folks get in touch with you?
Yeah. So we have a website. It's www.thenextwavegroup.com. And
Yep.
yes, there is a little bit of a surfing theme in there. So you can go into there, you can sign in, and we have a guide that we provide that talks about backyard investing. And so I would say that's the best way to do it.
Amazing. Marcel, thanks for your time. Really enjoyed our interview today, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. But all the best, and I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. But thanks again, Marcelo.
Cool. Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Limitless Podcast. If you would like to learn more about creating financial freedom, visit us at limitlessnewconstruction.com and check out the show notes for more resources. And don't forget to show some love by liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Keep investing in yourself and keep living limitless.